In the first lecture, we addressed the question, who am I? Am I a body? Or do I have a body? We showed that we, like all life, are essentially sparks of eternity, monads, boundless, cyclical, and eternally growing. Dynamic centers of consciousness, which have always existed and will always exist. Well, in the second lecture, we discussed the mystery of man. And in it, we showed that in our human evolution, we are thinkers and develop self-consciousness. And that we can direct our development by focusing more on the spiritual imperishable part in our composite being, which consists of a spiritual, a learning, and a vehicular part. An essential conclusion so far is that every human being has an infinite higher nature, and that we fundamentally carry all possibilities within us. It has been noted here that we have developed from an unself-conscious spark of eternity into a self-conscious human being. As self-conscious humans, we will increasingly learn to express our deepest essence, that which is always there, and to express it in the world we live in. But we are not there yet. There is still a long way to go. Therefore, in this third lecture, we want to address the question, how can we as humans learn to further express our deepest essence, that spark of eternity? How to express that boundless universal core that we essentially are? Or in other words, how can we truly become humans with a capital H? Universal humans, or divine humans, you could also say. How can we express the spiritual side, the monad, through our material side, our vehicle? Well, to answer this question, it is important first to make clear what the characteristics of a universal human being are. How do you recognize the characteristics, the qualities of what we are in our deepest essence? The heart of it is a sense of oneness, the inner seeing and knowing that everything is one and inseparable. Consequently, you will be a living expression of that unity. It is a sense so powerful that you have completely transcended the idea that you are separate from others. This means that you also continuously act from that sense of oneness. You do not act for your own benefit, but to enhance the whole. You consistently think impersonally, as I.S.I.S called it in his lecture. And this universal impersonal thinking from a sense of oneness also implies living morally, according to our highest ethical insights. Indeed, if you proceed from oneness, there is no spirituality without morality. Everything you do or think, you do from that sense of oneness. So from that vision of oneness, it follows that you are selfless by nature, just by nature, compassionate by nature, patient, etc. In short, all the virtues we encounter in the various world traditions from east to west, from Plato to Buddha. So these virtues are not randomly invented, but arise from an inner recognition of the fundamental oneness of all life. All this means that ethics is not an invented or human construct, but a fundamental reality in the universe, a law of nature. So who we essentially are as human beings is therefore also a thoroughly ethical question. The true universal human being is one who knows himself to be one with the whole and acts ethically. This human being always acts for the common good and in the service of the whole. Everyone, whether young or old, has an intuitive awareness of this to a greater or a lesser extent. Only we also all know how difficult it is to actually live up to it. Why is this so? And what do we need to do to grow towards it? Well, now we said in the first lecture that all growth comes from within. There is an inner source of inspiration. Nothing we learn is added from outside. We can only develop through our own effort. Yet, our environment plays an important role in this. But what about that? Because if everything comes from within, what is the role of our environment in our character growth? In expressing our universal human characteristics? Well, you can only understand this properly if you assume karma and reincarnation. In the first lecture, we already talked about the universal principle of cyclicity, the boundless consciousness, which every being essentially is, goes through cycles with alternation of activity and rest, of life and death. Everything re-embodies itself. Applying that to the life of human and animal consciousness, which dresses itself in a body of flesh, we are talking about the law of reincarnation. Karma, or the law of cause and effect, is inextricably linked to it. Reincarnation and karma cannot be explained without each other. How and where we incarnate proceeds entirely according to the law of cause and effect. In the second lecture, we told how every action is preceded by a thought, how repetitions of thoughts become habits, and thus collectively form our character, and how that works out over several lifetimes as well. We reincarnate and harvest in subsequent lives what we have sown in this and previous lives. So nothing just happens to us. Every incarnation we re-attract those things with which we created connections in previous life, whether positive or negative, because both love and hate are attractive forces. Which character traits we have, where we are born, in which country, to which parents, how healthy our body is, it all flows logically from this law of cause and effect. These laws of reincarnation and karma directly reflect the relationship of ourselves to our environment. Indeed, our environment is not accidental. Karmically, we are exactly there and in those circumstances to which we have drawn ourselves, in this or in a past life. This means that our circumstances are nothing but a mirror for ourselves, a feedback for our previous behavior and actions. This understanding allows you to see your circumstances as exactly that learning material, that impulse that is needed for you to grow as a human being, to come more and more into harmony with all other life. Sometimes they act as limitations we have to overcome, and sometimes they act as opportunities or talents we can use for the greater good. Understanding this makes your circumstances appear in a totally different light. Then you realize that your circumstances are totally just, because nothing happens to us that doesn't belong to us. Nobody but ourselves is responsible for our circumstances. And the same applies to our future that we are making now. We have that future, and whether it is harmonious or disharmonious, in our own hands. The fact that our circumstances stem from our own thinking and actions is therefore a very hopeful thought. Because if you want different circumstances, both personally and in the world, then you can, indeed you must, start with yourself. You then no longer see yourself as subordinate to fate, but you can take your life into your own hands. You realize then that you are a human being with a task in life. You have lessons to learn. Lessons that suit your character, to take the next step beyond the level to which you have already developed, to grow into a co-worker with nature. Well, in this respect, the picture outlined in the second lecture of impersonal thinking is very important. Impersonal thinking is not thinking from the personality, I thinking, identifying with the outer Mariska as I sit here as a person, living in Delft and working in The Hague. No, by thinking impersonally, we mean the universal, more abstract thinking that I am capable of as a human being. The thinking that transcends my personality. The I am thinking. It is about identifying with humanity as a whole, from a sense of oneness. This makes us rise above our personal circumstances, such as where you live, who your family is, where you work, etc. The growth that comes from within is the growth of personal I thinking to the impersonal I am thinking. We can hold on to this impersonal thinking even when our circumstances sometimes seem not so positive or limiting. From the perspective of our impersonal thinking, we know that we carry within us all the potential for restoration and growth. In the light of reincarnation and karma, certain circumstances don't just come our way at any given moment either. Instead, they are occasions that give us the opportunity to learn, to restore harmony. For instance, you ask a bit too much of your body, you get tired or overworked, and need to recover from that. Well, if we use our impersonal thinking and reflect on our situation, we will also realize that we may have asked a bit too much of ourselves, and that now is the time to take it easy and keep our head in the game, or listen more to our heart. And across multiple lifetimes, that principle is no different. Only we no longer have the memory of the causes we have sown in previous lifetimes. We may be born with a physical disability and therefore be less fit than others. At the same time, this does not prevent us from developing mentally, and perhaps in doing so, we develop more empathy for others who are also limited and see how we can advocate for them. Understanding this natural law of cause and effect thus means that we will not see ourselves as victims of our circumstances. We realize then that it's not the circumstances as such which determine our lives, but how we experience them and then react to them. From the perspective of karma, all challenging circumstances then become moments for learning, opportunities to grow. Consequently, we can draw the conclusion that learning and development always happens in collaboration with the environment. No human being can exist in isolation. So the answer to the question of how our growth of character is related to our environment is that there is no real distinction between ourselves and our environment. We are our environment. And this also makes sense if you proceed from oneness. It is just that we often don't realize this enough yet. In the first lecture, we showed that we are a spark of eternity in the core of our being. And now we add that we can only bring out this quality in connection with our environment. We are our environment and simply could not be there without all the other life, the billions of cells that make up our bodies, the thoughts to express ourselves, the plants and animals that provide us with food, the sun with its rays that supplies the earth with everything it needs. All life, all those infinite monads, are inseparable and interconnected. We can only develop our qualities as human beings in cooperation with the whole. We cannot exist without each other. That's a thought at the heart of all religious and philosophical traditions. But it's particularly powerfully formulated in Ubuntu philosophy. I am because we are. And with this conclusion, we return to our initial question: how can we as humans become more of our true essence? Well, to this end, I recall what I said earlier about the idea that a characteristic of our deepest essence is ethical, with acting from oneness as the starting point. And with what was discussed in the first lecture, that all life, all monads, constitute the unity like the drops in the ocean, wherein each drop is also essentially the ocean itself. When we combine this with what we have just told you about our relationship with our environment, we hold the key to how we truly become human with a capital H. Namely, that in all situations, in how we react to our environment, deal with our circumstances, etc., we act morally above all else, according to our highest ethical views. That we interact continuously with our environment and all life around us, supporting that life, helping that life to develop. Then we develop our character with capital C and become the universal human. With the development of our thinking, we become self-conscious at the human stage. And this is an essential step in our evolution as consciousness, as it allows us to reflect on ourselves and give direction to our evolution. The paradox, however, is that just as we have become self-conscious and can reflect on ourselves, in order to grow further, we have to forget ourselves again. To become really human, we must learn to think from our higher impersonal part, must learn to develop from the personal I am I consciousness towards the impersonal I am consciousness. Because the next step for us is to recognize that the idea of a personal self as an entity separate from others is an illusion. There is no such thing as a separate self. We are in everything connected to our environment and all life. And so, it is not about developing our personal self, but about developing the whole, of which we are a natural part. The heart of it is our sense of oneness, which we previously named as the defining characteristic of the universal human being. It is therefore an illusion to think that you first have to grow spiritually or become wise before you can help others. It is actually the other way around. By practically helping others around you, living according to our best ethical understanding, you increasingly unfold your inner essence, not as an end in itself, but as a result of realizing that there is no separateness, and as a result of thinking and acting from oneness. Thinking and acting from the highest part, the highest ideal we have within us. It is not by chance that one of the Theosophical teachers says, it must begin with our relations to and with each other. And as one of H.P. Blavatsky's teachers says, well, now in my own words, nothing makes sense to us unless it is moral, unless it contributes to the growth and well-being of humanity. Now, what does this I am because we are mean in practice? How do we interact with our environment and circumstances? In short, it is about fulfilling our task in life and increasingly developing and using our talents in the service of the whole, for unity, from the realization that we are that whole, that unity. We would like to name at this point some examples that are applicable in our current society. We are currently living in a restless phase. There is war in various parts of the world. There is unrest. Some people are opposing groups of other people from other cultural backgrounds. The unity of mankind has been lost sight of. But fortunately, there are always those who focus on promoting or restoring harmony. Or healing the society, you could also say. They are already more advanced and already proceed from oneness in their thinking and actions. Assuming humanity as a unity, in principle, every human being is involved in every conflict in the world. We are all citizens of the world and can have an impact on humanity's thinking, even if we live on the other side of the globe. It is about rising above the opposing parties in disharmonious situations, for instance in the case of an occupied country, and discussing whether a just solution can be found for both parties, knowing that both parties are and remain connected in that unity. Another example of I am because we are in practice is how to help someone who feels lonely, misunderstood, or abandoned, for instance. You are then dealing with someone who is struggling with disharmony in him or herself, and at that moment cannot connect with the highest part in himself. The learning, male part in him has ceased to trust itself because it has forgotten the imperishable spiritual part, or is confused about its present. That person assumes that his highest part does not exist anymore or has not yet sufficiently succeeding in basing his trust on it when thinking and acting. Especially in difficult situations on his life path, such as when he thinks he is approaching someone with the best intentions, but yet somehow fails to connect or even meets resistance. That person has become stuck in the illusion that he is separate from others, and that he has to solve everything on his own and survive on his own. While influenced by this illusion, his thinking and actions will therefore often narrow and limit themselves to his own interest, to what seems to help and benefit himself in the short term. And how can we help people in such situations? That is, from understanding that situation. And in that case, you can help to re-establish their connection with our inner nature and help to experience the oneness again. Well, this is, of course, a gradual process. Just continually showing that you appreciate the presence of the other person is already an opening to connection. And every small step that a person can take as active contributor to his or her environment, such as accepting a parcel for a neighbor, caring for a plant, looking after a pet, it all represents a connection to oneness. Another example is the discussion in our society about the idea of completed life, mostly among the elderly. Research has shown that a good number of elderly people who initially thought their lives were completed have changed their minds after becoming aware of the background of that completed life idea, namely, that what they really wanted was to continue to contribute to society and participate, with heart and soul, based on their ideals. And that is realizable in all circumstances. The healing process of a disharmonious man, or better still, the whole disharmonious humanity, consists in transforming this thought of distrust in oneself into insight and trust in the oneness of life, in the higher nature of each of us, the impersonal, which is an inseparable part of the whole universal life. That we actually consciously realize and internalize that statement, I am because we are. And that is the great challenge we face together, to transform disharmony into a dynamic harmony. A harmony that offers space for the contribution and growth of everyone, and that remains in constant motion, that is, dynamic. Well, finally, The key thoughts from the 3 lectures in a nutshell. In the first lecture, we told you that as human beings we are essentially sparks of eternity, with infinite abilities to express. In the second lecture, we told you that as human beings in our infinite evolutionary journey, we are in the process of expressing our ability to think. That with that thinking, we have developed self-consciousness and the ability to independently direct our thinking and thus our lives. And finally, in this lecture, we have dwelt on the ideal of the universal human being, the human being we are becoming, whose main characteristic is the sense of oneness in thought and action. We can try to be that human being already now, by seeing that our environment is exactly the environment we have desired for ourselves, according to karma and reincarnation, that we are truly one with that environment and can fulfill a function in it, and by trying to live from that key thought from the Ubuntu philosophy, I am because we are. Well, and what that further means for ourselves in a practical sense, how we deal with our environment and our circumstances ourselves, that is what we will discuss in the workshop entitled Heal Society, Heal Yourself. See you later in the workshop.